Thank you very much. Okay, I will do, of course, I will speak in English, but before I get to that, and thank you very much for the invite and introduction, I just want to share something that happened to me the other evening that was a little bit embarrassing. Maar ek gaan dit in Afrikaans doen. Right. Ek is uitgenooi om 'n klomp dames te kom toespreek een aand. En ek is nie bang om voor mense te praat nie, maar ek is bang om voor kinders te praat en bang om voor vrouens te praat. En ek stap in laat die aand en dis my beurt gewees net na die wynproe. En dit klink soos 'n hoenderhok toe ek nou daar deurloop. En ek gaan staan voor en ek sê vir hulle baie dankie dat ek hier is en so. So waar moet ek begin? En 'n ouerige dame spring op voor. Sy sê begin met jou hemp. Begin met jou hemp. Nou ja, dit het my heeltemal ontspoor, kan ek vir julle sê. Thanks again for the invite. Okay, my job after France, I mean, how can I do a proper talk this morning after France? He's touched on so many things that I certainly are going to touch on as well. Hopefully I will be able to give a slightly different perspective on some of these things. A good place for me to start is always to say, listen, what is that thing that makes an economy successful? Is there some magic ingredients, ingrediënte, soos my ouma gesê het? Is there something that you can do that guarantees economic growth? And I believe yes, I think there are. And you don't need to have a PhD in economics or econometric model to understand that. It's really quite easy to understand. In fact, these three ingredients, I use that when I look at the new economy to analyze the economy to tell you whether this economy is going to be successful or not. And you get it in all these successful economies. And the three things are the following. The first one is you must protect private property rights. And with that, I mean a very broad definition of private property rights. It includes things like, for example, my life. If you steal my life, we call it murder, but it's theft in a way. And many other private property rights must be protected. The second one is there is no free lunch, with one exception. And that one exception is free trade. Because think about this a little bit. If there's free trade between two economic agents, both the buyer and the seller gain from this transaction. Otherwise, the transaction wouldn't have happened. And that is a free lunch. You create value out of nothing by allowing people to treat freely. And again, I mean the very broad definition of free trade. And that's why the protection of private property rights is so important, because if I don't own something, I cannot trade that, and I cannot create free lunches. The third one is you must have sound money. And sound money simply means low inflation. It is crucially important in a free economy for prices to go up and down. But because prices going up and down are like signals in the economy, telling us to produce more or less of this and that, consume more, produce more or less of whatever. But when all prices keep on going up, we can't see the signals. And if you can't see the signals, you cannot allocate resources properly. And that's why it's crucially important. There are many other bad things about inflation as well. But this fundamental reason is the reason why we must have low inflation. So looking at those three important ingredients that guarantees economic growth, how are we doing in South Africa? If you look at the protection of private property rights, I don't need to tell you much about that. Nominally, we have private property right protection in South Africa, but we've just handed a tool into the hands of politicians. They haven't used that yet, but a tool into the hands of politicians that allows them to steal private property. That's not a good thing. Private property rights in South Africa are nominally protected, but they can change, and they can change quite rapidly and quickly. And people see that, and investors see that as well. Just by the way, I'm not too concerned about the expropriation from the state, but it is important from a symbolic point of view for a state to steal one or two properties, farms, for example, and put it in the front pages of the newspapers, just to show they've done something. But a much bigger threat to South Africa are the mobs taking over property or any kind of asset and the state not doing something about that. That's a much bigger threat to private property rights in South Africa. Secondly, do we have free trade in South Africa? The answer is, again, nominally yes. But broadly speaking, there are many obstacles to free trade in South Africa. The most obvious one is my property, my labor. I'm not allowed to sell that freely unless I charge a certain price for that. So I'm not allowed to create a free lunch. Do we have inflation in South Africa? Yes, we do some inflation. We have some inflation. The Reserve Bank has been very successful in getting inflation where it is currently, but the inflationary pressures that we do have in South Africa are mostly created by the state or the authorities, the local authorities, Eskom and the like. and a very uncompetitive macroeconomic environment. So you look at those three very important ingredients that guarantees economic growth, then I'm afraid we're not doing very well. We need to change those kind of things. So that is just a starting point. A second thing I want to touch on, sometimes if you look at the economy, if you look at the world, if you look how things are changing, sometimes things happen so quickly you can't see it. And sometimes things happen so slowly you can't see it. And here are some examples. Something that's happening very slowly is that demographic changes are changing the world in which we are living in, all over the place. Now, what is interesting, if you see in a poor community, there are a lot of kids, very few of them survive, but as you get more affluent, you become wealthier, women start having fewer children, and all good things sort of move in the same directions. And once you get at a certain level of income, your life expectancy increases to a certain level. And typically, when life expectancy is around 80, 85 years, population growth flattens out and starts going into negative. But you have to get rich before your population starts getting fewer. But a couple of very interesting things are happening. It's not only rich countries today where populations are getting smaller. There are many examples of poor countries where populations are also contracting. Russia is a good example. China is another good example. But the implications of that to the world's economy is going to be dramatic, to say the least. In South Korea, for instance, the average woman gets 0.75 kids. Tiny kids they get in South Korea. 0.75 kids in South Korea. And that means in South Korea, the population will halve every 30, 35 years. In South Korea, another example is that they sell more dog prams than baby prams. You will need more and more people to look after a population that's getting older and older. It's going to be dramatic how it's going to affect the world economy and politics. In Europe, for example, populations are contracting quite rapidly, but in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, populations are still growing quite strongly, and that means it's like a vacuum sucking in all the surplus workers from Sub-Saharan Africa and some poorer countries, and that leads to all sort of political reactions in Europe. We've just seen, for example, elections, or many places in Europe, with more right-wing governments coming into power. So that's a very important change that is happening. Another important change, and we all know about this, is dramatic changes as far as technology is concerned. Now, we all know about artificial intelligence. We know, and especially in agriculture, there are amazing things happening. But more importantly is if you stand back a little bit, you see all these technological changes, the effect thereof on the economy is the following. In the past, a lot of economic wealth creation happened in the primary industries. Agriculture is a very good example of that. But gradually over time, the primary industries have become less important, the secondary more important, that's manufacturing typically, but it's the tertiary industries. That part of the economy that's really driven by technology, that part of the economy, by services, that part of the economy is where the real economic growth is happening. But the really interesting thing is, for me, is that many companies that are involved in a primary part of the economy, agriculture again, typically, are becoming more and more service-orientated. Now, this is crucially important because for a number of reasons. Firstly, it is, when you look, for example, at agriculture, it is not about the land. What is important is what you do with the land. And there are some other changes happening in agriculture as well. Let me come back to that just now. I just want to touch on some other industries that I also like. I like education. Education is going to be completely reformed by new technologies. And it will be possible for poor countries to give their population access to the best skills development in the world because of changes in technology. Another one has to do with what I also like, and that is personalized medicine. That's a broad term. That includes things like, for example, genetic profiling for individuals and things like that. So medicine, broadly speaking, is going to change quite dramatically. And finance. Finance is also changing quite dramatically. I'm referring to things like, for example, blockchain technology, things like Bitcoin and other private sector digital currencies, and also the emergence of central bank digital currencies. So the world of finance is going to change quite dramatically, and that will have certain implications for things like, for example, foreign exchange regulations in South Africa. It is possible today. Remember, you need to get permission from the Reserve Bank if you want to take out more than 1 million rand. You're limited to 10 million rand or 11 million in total annually. But if you buy Bitcoin, you can buy 100 million rand worth of Bitcoin and send it wherever you want to. I don't understand why we have still forex controls in South Africa, because you can circumvent that very, very easily. So that's the sort of implications or the results of these new technological changes in the world of finance. But come back to agriculture. What is the traditional business plan of a farm? You've got Papa, he's responsible for personnel, he's the electrician, he go and borrow money from the bank, he pay for the input on the farm, and go and pay back the bank and deliver whatever you've produced to the coöperasie. That's the business plan of a farm up to now. Suddenly, farming is changing quite dramatically. Farming is not a one-man show anymore. It's becoming a corporate business. Today, if you want to be involved in agriculture, you can be an accountant, you can be a geneticist, you can be anything and be involved in agriculture. And that's a good thing. And I think in future what we're going to see corporates working in agriculture like any other company or like any other kind of business. But more importantly, it's becoming more service orientated. A lot of value add happens at universities with the genetic stuff that geneticists do, for example, precision farming that you guys know much more than I know about, for example, and it's becoming a service industry. And that is important for South Africa to understand this, because if you look at the quality of South Africa's skills development, we simply do not prepare our young people to be part of this modern economy. Because the quality of your education in South Africa is not only bad, it is sometimes of the worst in the world. And we're going to hear about that this afternoon again, because the Minister of Finance, that if there is a budget, the biggest chunk of state expenditure of the budget goes to education. Okay, that's just by way of background. So let me just see what's going on in the world, and I'm just going to walk around the world and touch on a couple of economies, and then come back to South Africa, and probably going to repeat some of the stuff that Frans has said already. Now, the first economy where I want to stop is the Russians. The Russian economy is doing very well. It seems to me as if there's going to be some sort of ceasefire between the Russians and the Ukrainians now, which is a good thing. I think the reality is that the Ukrainians must make peace with the fact that they're going to lose a big chunk of Ukraine to Russia. That is just the reality. But if you picture the map of Ukraine and Russia and look at some other issues that's happening there, you will find there's a very important city called Odessa. That's a Ukrainian city, harbor city, and Putin wants that as well. And the reason why he wants that is because a little bit to the left, if you picture the map, there's a slither of land called Transnistria between Moldova and Ukraine, and that is mostly ethnic Russians. And Putin wants that as well. And if he takes that over, then Ukraine will be completely isolated from the Black Sea. So although there could be some sort of peace deal or ceasefire in the short term, I think eventually what Putin has in mind is to really close off Ukraine completely from the Black Sea. But let's hope there's going to be a ceasefire. I think so. It looks like that. The Russian economy is doing very well at the moment, but that is because of huge expenditure on the military. So they're boosting the expenditure on the military, boosting economic growth in Russia in the short term, but in the medium, longer term, then I'm afraid the Russian economy is not going to do well. They are already experiencing upward pressure on inflation. They've got very high levels of interest as it is, interest rates already, and that's likely to continue. And I suspect the Russian economy will run into some real difficulty within a year or two. So if you export to Russia, keep that in mind, high levels of inflation in Russia. The second economy, and in the meantime, they're experiencing significant contraction in their population, which is also a headwind to economic growth in Russia. The second economy that I'm going to touch on are the Chinese economy. Now, that was the growth engine of the world for for decades, in fact, for about 30 years. The Chinese economy was that force that drove the world economy forward. Well, that's over. The Chinese economy is not going to be that magic economic driving force to the world for much longer. They are aiming for 5% economic growth. Last year, they told us they achieved 5% economic growth. I don't believe that. I think they fiddled a little bit with the numbers, and they've got some significant problems. Population issues as well, like exactly the same as Russia. But they have some other problems. They've got an asset bubble, property bubble that is imploding at the moment, and very high levels of debt, especially at local authority levels. They're struggling to repay that. In the meantime, Xi Jinping is a real communist at heart, and he's making certain changes and adjustments to the Chinese economy that is going to be negative to economic growth in China for some time. In fact, for a very long period of time. Then an economy, I'm just going to touch quickly on that because that could have some significant implications to the world economy, are the Japanese. The Japanese economy is waking out of its slumber. It's been going nowhere for about 30 years. Now suddenly we've got some inflationary pressures coming from Japan. They have exceptionally high levels of state debt in Japan, and because of rising interest rates in Japan, gradually the so-called carry trade is not so profitable anymore, and the result of that is money flowing out of countries like, for example, the United States and South Africa back into Japan, and that is also contributing to downward pressure on asset prices internationally. There are many other things as well. Okay, that's that one. The economy that I absolutely love, that I think is going to be the engine of economic growth for the world going forward, is Narendra Modi's economy, and that, of course, is India. India is a place to be. The composition of the Indian economy is different from that of the Chinese. It's quite interesting. They're much better integrated with the Western world, very much service-orientated, and a lot of agriculture as well, by the way, and many agricultural opportunities there, just also, by the way. But the Indian economy is a place that I think is where the world economic growth is going to happen for most of the next couple of decades. Then the economy that's just not going anywhere are the Europeans. We see a shift to the right in Europe politically. Especially, we've just seen that in Germany as well. But I've got a suspicion that the Europeans are waiting for their own Trump moment. So that is probably going to happen. It could happen maybe in France, not too long from now. Okay, so but there's certainly a shift to the right in Europe, but population or economic growth in Europe is just not, they're not going anywhere. And the main reason for that has to do with the German economy that is really the laggard in Europe. With the new government there, and obviously there's this push for more expenditure on defense in Europe, that can lead to a temporary boost in economic growth in Europe. But for now, they're not going anywhere. But the super economy in the world, of course, are the Americans. The American economies, there's just no end to the American economy, just keep on growing. Remember, it's a big economy growing at 2 and 3% is a massive value add. That is happening there. And that's what's happening. That has been happening in the US economy for many, many years. The US economy is really just growing. And many economists, including myself, we've been predicting recessions in the US economy for a number of years. It hasn't happened. And now, again, there are signs and some predictions that the US economy is heading for a recession. I'm not so sure, but I'm pretty sure there will be a bit of a slowdown in economic growth in the United States. Donald Trump, he's the new guy. And we have to know what he stands for, and there are 4 things that he stands for. The first one is tariffs. Tariffs mean that if you want to send something, if you want to export something to the United States, whoever imports that will have to pay a tax on that, an import tax on that. The result of that will be that the American consumer will have to pay more for whatever they export to the United States, and that will put upward pressure on inflation in the US. Now that's important for us to understand what's going to happen to inflation in the US because we're part of this global financial system, and if the Americans keep interest rates relatively high, then we cannot adjust interest rates. We have to roughly follow whatever the Americans do in terms of short-term interest rates because we're part of the global financial system. So that is likely to lead to inflationary pressures in the US, firstly, but maybe with some protection that can lead to some local US companies starting to produce a little bit more. So it could actually support, depending on whether Donald Trump is right or wrong. I think it's wrong, just by the way, to impose all these import tariffs. The second one is he's deporting everybody and his dog, which is also going to be bad for inflation in the United States, except for, of course, the Afrikaners, they can go to the US. but the illegal guys are being deported. By the way, Biden, the previous administration, deported more people. But anyway, he's trying to deport a lot of illegal immigrants to the United States, taking away all these cheap workers. and that means replacing them with more expensive workers, again putting upward pressure on inflation in the US. The third one that he does, which can be good or bad to the US economy, is, or what he stands for, is lower corporate taxes in the United States. So lower corporate taxes in the United States, remember, they've got very high levels of debt and also huge fiscal deficit, 7%. Fiscal deficit to GDP in the United States compared to our 5% or even less than 5%. So that means they need to borrow a lot of money, and if they reduce taxes, the fiscal deficit will be widened even more, and that will eventually be inflationary. That's one argument. Another argument is that if you lower taxes on companies, they will produce more, which will eventually lead to more economic growth, which effectively over time will be deflationary. So depending on which one of these two factors will be the strongest will determine what is going to happen. Then, of course, there is Elon Musk, Dodge. So what he does, and that's the fourth policy approach of Donald Trump. What he does, he wants to take a chainsaw like Xavier Milei. Xavier Milei is my hero, just by the way, and cut down on state expenditure in the United States. If he is successful, it will be very good for economic growth in the US, but unfortunately it seems to be a little bit chaotic the way he's doing that, and that can undermine the administration in the US. But the good thing is certainly is, and this is what the world needs to know, is that states and governments are just too big all over the place. They must be reduced in size. And that's what Xavier Milei is doing. Just by the way, earlier this year in Davos, when was it, January, Xavier Milei was at the World Economic Forum, and he delivered the most amazing speech. Go and Google that. Xavier Milei, President of Argentina, World Economic Forum, Davos. That's the most amazing speech. Okay, that's where the world is. I just want to make a comment about BRICS countries. The BRICS countries, the biggest challenge or the biggest problem that Donald Trump has with the BRICS countries is that they are going to create their own reserve currency. Well, that is not going to happen. So don't worry about that, because if you want a reserve currency, you need a very deep and a liquid capital market behind you, and the only country that has that is the United States. So in a way, the high levels of debt is also the reason why the US dollar is the world's dominant currency, and it will remain that. Although we can create some payment systems between the various countries in the BRICS countries, we will not create as BRICS countries a reserve currency that can dominate or surpass or replace the US dollar. That just will not happen. Okay, so that's the world. That's how I see the world. Let's go to South Africa, and let's start off with the ANC. And again, Frans touched on a lot of this. As far as I'm concerned, the ANC stands for four things also. The first one, ideologically, the ANC got stuck somewhere in the 1920s. They talk about a socialist government. They talk about a developmental state. They call one another comrade. I mean, that's so childish. So it's somewhere leftish. That's ideologically what the ANC believing. From that, you get policies that stem from this ideological stance. And some of these policies fit in with a leftish kind of ideology are things like, for example, expropriation, the NHI, even Bella, all those sort of things. The state believes they are much better doing things. The ANC, they're much better doing things as a government than you and I, the private sector. So the policies stem from what they believe ideologically, and those policies are wrong because the beginning part, the ideology is wrong. It's not fit for a modern economy. Let me just interrupt myself and say, although the ANC is ideologically leftish, that's only a few guys in the ANC that's really ideologues. The majority of them, their own ideology is, let me line my pocket. That is their ideology. Let's be honest about that. The third thing that the ANC is known for is cadre deployment. And another name for cadre deployment is incompetence. Incompetence at various levels. I'm going to touch on that a little bit. And the fourth thing that the ANC stands for quite often is corruption. So that's what we have. Wrong ideology, wrong policy, cadre deployment, and corruption. That's the ANC characterized by. The result of that was that the ANC is the most destructive force we have ever seen in the history of South Africa at various levels. If we look at the local authority levels, More than 70% of the local authorities got qualified audits, for example. More than 70% cannot survive financially. Now, this is important in the light of the budget that is probably going to be delivered this afternoon. Because previously what we do, we look at the government, the central government, and the budget of the Minister of Finance, look at things like the deficit that Frans talked about, the debt levels and various taxes and so on. That is the Minister of Finance's budget. But that's not all, because you need to include other things as well. Previously, the local authorities could wash their own faces, their own revenue sources, they stood at their own feet financially. They can't do that anymore. The same goes for the state-owned enterprises. And much of this debt is implicitly or explicitly guaranteed by the Minister of Finance. So if you really want to be honest about what's going on in the state's finances, you have to include this stuff. Include it into the actual numbers, the numbers of the Minister of Finance. For example, the local authorities, a year ago, the outstanding debt of the local authorities to Eskom was 60 billion rand a year ago. The Minister of Finance a year ago implemented a new plan to get the local authorities to repay their debt to Eskom. Today the outstanding debt to Eskom is 110 billion rand. There's no way they can repay that. The local authorities need a lot of money. Where are they going to get that? Will that be in the budget this afternoon? No. That means the budget doesn't mean much. The same goes for the state-owned enterprises. Now, they have been run into the ground financially and operationally as well. Look at Eskom. We know what's... And by the way, my estimates is for economic growth that's going to be less than 1.5% this year. I can't see that we can grow faster than 1.5%. And the reason is Eskom. The moment you start growing above 1%, whoop, the handbrake goes on. And the handbrake is a lack of electricity. So we can't grow the economy fast enough because of Eskom and, of course, many, many other reasons. The same goes for Telkom. Telkom's outstanding debt is approximately 150 billion rand. Telkom cannot survive without a cash injection. The speech of the Minister of Finance was leaked about 12 o'clock when 2 or 3 weeks ago when he wanted to deliver his budget speech. And there's nothing about support for Telkom, nothing. So Telkom needs money. The only thing that they can do, and there's a bit of a silver lining here, is that in the case of Eskom, the private sector is coming to the party, putting all the solar panels, which is a good thing. It's a good thing. The same goes to Transnet in a way, the new boss at Transnet. I think she's doing an excellent job, just by the way, and she's in talks with many, many various potential investors. And a good thing will be if we could get some big company to run the ports. And I think that is going to happen, by the way. A better thing will be if we sell the ports. And there are potential buyers out there. But this time, I think, before it's going to be completely destroyed, like, for example, Eskom, we will get more private sector participation. And I think that is probably going to happen. So there, again, it's a bit of a silver lining. But look, for example, at the post office. The post office is just coming to an end. It's not even, it's just dying. And that's what's happened to South African state-owned enterprises, largely the last couple of years. Okay, let's have a look at the budget then. Can I just take a step back and just make two comments about politics? So we have the so-called government of national unity, and as Frans indicated, is that initially there was support for that, and then the DA probably lost a lot of support initially, because the impression was created by the ANC very cleverly that the DA supports everything that the ANC is doing, including expropriation and that sort of stuff. And the DA was quiet. And I think the DA simply was, and they supported. Look at the State of the Nation address. I mean, they applauded the new president. Compare that to a year ago. That's quite interesting. But suddenly the DA found their voices, and they realized, but they are actually powerful. And that happened in the budget. And that's why we didn't have a budget previously, or 3 weeks ago, because the DA said we're not going to stand for a 2% increase or 2 percentage point increase in value-added tax. So that's a very important thing that has happened. And from now on, I believe that the budget is going to be a very important political play ball, which is a good thing. The budget should be, that's the heart of the democracy, as far as I'm concerned. But so what's going to happen in politics? The best thing I believe that the DA can do is stick along and go along with the government of national unity until about a year or so before the next general election, and then get out of the government of national unity to make it very clear that we stand on our own feet, we want to create our own brand, and we really want to oppose the ANC and maybe become the next government in South Africa. So I think that GNU will go on, but it won't see the full term. And that's the reason why. Then also think a little bit Previously, we've got this habit of recalling our presidents or presidents of the ANC, and it could happen to Cyril Ramaphosa as well. Remember, next year we've got the local authority elections, and I hope the ANC is going to lose big time again. But if he is recalled, who's going to replace him? And this is something that really makes me quite uncomfortable, because Cyril Ramaphosa, and he's not a good president, he's a consensus seeker, but he's the guy keeping the whole government of national unity intact. And if he's not there anymore, then somebody else is going to take over from him. And let's pick a couple of names. Paul Masachile. Go and read what they say about Paul Masachile in the newspapers. Another one is Gwede Mantashe. See what he's been doing at Minerals. Another one is Fikile Mbalula. So those are the second layers of leaders that can potentially take over from Cyril Ramaphosa. And I don't have very much confidence in any one of those. But anyway, so I don't think it's going to see the full term, the government of national unity. Coming back to the budget. So what do we have in the budget? So all of a sudden the DA found their voices, said, no, we're not going to support this 2 percentage point increase because it's very bad. It's a regressive tax. It's a tax that's heavy on the poor, and we must make another plan. Now, repeating some of the numbers that Frans have mentioned already. So the debt to GDP ratio today is in excess of 75% of GDP, far higher than most countries in our position. Just by the way, the American debt to GDP ratio is in excess of 100% of GDP, but they've got the dollar. We don't have the dollar. So there's a big difference there. So the debt to GDP ratio is in excess of 75% of GDP. The fiscal deficit is probably going to be about 5% or just less than 5% of GDP. But remember the local authorities and remember the state-owned enterprises. So the debt of the state is in excess of 5 trillion rand. But there's guarantees, explicit guarantees of about 800 billion rand to the various state-owned enterprises, which you have to add to that outstanding 5 trillion odd. Trillion debt that we have already, plus some extra. There are many other debts that's not even included in there. Like, for example, the Road Action Fund, which is completely bankrupt by a couple of hundreds of billions, in fact. But anyway, not even including that, the actual debt to GDP ratio in South Africa today, if we do it the proper way, is approximately 95% of GDP. Now we're heading for some serious trouble in South Africa. So who are the people? Who holds that debt? Who funds the state? And this is where the orange guy comes in. Now, locally, a lot of this debt is being funded by the pension funds, the savings industry, the insurers locally, and the local banks, for example. Just by the way, about 2 years ago, the South African Reserve Bank said that the local banks are holding too much government debt instruments on their balance sheets. And remember, when long-term interest rates go up, the value of assets go down. So if there's a sudden spike in long-term yields, long-term capital market instruments yields, then the assets of the banks will come under pressure, will fall, and the financial sector in South Africa can get into trouble. Okay, so there are local guys funding the debt of the Minister of Finance. Our biggest trading partner are the Chinese. We trade a lot with them. And our second biggest trading partner are the Americans, and then, of course, the Europeans. They are our major trading partners. But the Chinese do not buy our government debt instruments, the foreigners, because foreigners also fund some of that. It's the Americans and Europeans. They buy our foreign debt instruments. Now, if Donald Trump gets angry at us and he kicks off AGOA, my calculation is that GDP growth will lose about 0.2% or so, which is not that much, but in an economy that's hardly growing, that is a lot, actually. So, but it's not the end of the world. If we add some more sanctions against South Africa, that will, of course, make things even more difficult. But if Donald Trump tells his local asset managers in the United States to start selling all our government bonds and never to buy it again, now we're in some real trouble. See what happened to South Africa in the 1980s with financial sanctions? That is similar. And that's the big stick. And he hasn't even talked about that. And I hope nobody's going to tell him about that. Right, so let's get back. Let's get back to the budget. What's going to happen to the budget this afternoon? A few things. Like I've said, is that the debt levels have become unsustainable. We must reduce the debt levels. Today we spend more on interest on state debt than on social expenditure. And we in total, there are 30 million people out of a population of apparently 65 million people that get an income from the state every month. 30 million. the normal grant recipients and the glorified grant recipients, and they are, of course, the civil servants. Because the civil servants in South Africa are mostly overpaid and mostly underworked. Not all of them, but that is mostly the case. And they're going to get another 5.5% increase now, which is just not, shouldn't be accepted. Anyway, and by the way, there are less than 15 million people working in the private sector, which means there are more than 2 people getting an income from the state for every 1 person that works in the productive side of the South African economy. So what's going to happen in the budget? Well, on the revenue side, various taxes. I do believe that the Minister of Finance will propose an increase in value-added tax this afternoon. Probably 0.5, or 0.75 or so. That is not going to give him much more money, because he cannot do that without zero-rating a couple of other items. And if he does that, the total income will be even less on revenue on an increase in value-added tax. They say a 1% will give you about 30 billion rand extra, but they did not include the effect of the so-called second-round effect of value-added tax. And I tell you that if there's a 1% increase in VAT, the Minister of Finance should be very lucky if he gets 20 billion from that. So if a 0.5% increase, for example, that will probably give him about 10 billion. He's looking for at least 60 billion. So that's not going to be enough, even a 0.5%. It doesn't make sense to me, politically, to increase VAT at all, in fact. Just interesting, so the budget speech was leaked on page 17, 3 weeks ago. And page 17, it says, I want to increase VAT from 15 to 17%. The very next sentence, it says, to give the civil servants an increase. I mean, who wrote that speech? You must be stupid to say something like that. Anyway, so come back. So VAT, there's probably going to be a bit of an increase in VAT. There will be an increase in personal income taxes, the most important revenue source of the Minister of Finance. Not an increase in actual percentages, but a backdoor increase by not adjusting sufficiently for the effect of inflation. So expect an increase indirectly on personal income taxes. There will be an increase on the so-called sin taxes. Sin taxes, cigarettes and tobacco and stuff like that, but that's not going to affect many people in here, I guess. And then, of course, there will be an increase, I'm pretty much sure about this, there will be an increase on the fuel levy as well. Those are the various tax increases, which will not be nearly sufficient to cover that big hole. On the expenditure side, what can be expected there? Well, what should happen is the Minister of Finance should say, listen, we can't give the civil servants another above inflation increase. He can't do that. Kusatu is going to turn everything upside down in the streets. We know what Kusatu can do, and they're a very important partner to the ANC. So civil servants, that's what should happen, is probably not going to happen. Another thing that should happen, we have to stop giving these massive transfers to the state-owned enterprises, including to Transnet, for example, and make another plan there. That expense item will not be in the speech, but that must happen sometime over the next couple of months. I think there's a possibility the Minister of Finance may decide not to transfer the state's contribution to the Government Employment Pension Fund for the next year. That will save him about 50, 60 billion rand or so. So there is a substantial saving, but it's not nearly enough, and or rather, it's not totally unsustainable over time. Maybe just a comment, there's something called the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account at the South African Reserve Bank, and there's about 300 billion or so that the Minister of Finance can use. He's going to use 25 anyway, but he can use a little bit more from that. So maybe that's on the table as well. So the total debt to GDP ratio is likely to increase again. Now, the interesting thing is this would have been my 40th budget. I've been working at the South African Reserve Bank. I've been involved with Treasury setting our budget, and I've been analyzing it for donkey's years. The first time that this has happened now, where the budget has been postponed. I think from now on it will be a real political play ball going forward, which is a good thing, because the budget is actually the heart of a democracy. And if you look at the budget and what it stands for, it actually represents the social pact between the state and us. Because the primary role of the state is to protect me, to look after me and to look after my stuff. And you can see that in the budget. The budget is the primary function of the state is on things like, for example, defense and policing, and to create a macroeconomic environment that is good for business, and that's how you have to look at it. And we all have to contribute to the state. But I would argue that the state has broken this social pact, and I wonder whether we can still be expected to pay so much tax. The fiscus in South Africa is the most redistributive fiscus in the world, which means the people doing the paying are not the guys getting the income. And the redistributional impact of South Africa's fiscus is quite dramatic. Frans referred to low levels of investments in South Africa, and that's part of the reason why we have very low levels of investment, because the potential investors are taxed to such an extent there's very little left to invest in the economy as well. So we are really, this is a very important, where we are today is politically very important, and it is financially also very important, because from now on things are going to be different, and the budget is going to be a political play ball. One or two other things in the economy. I believe there's room for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates again. The Reserve Bank has been doing an excellent job. We all have to support Lesetja Kganyago in his attempt to get inflation lower. Currently, inflation is just over 3% or so. It's likely to go up a little bit. I'm not too concerned about that. But I would say 4.5% or just over 4.5%, below 5% is probably where we're going to see inflation over the medium term. Hopefully, the Minister of Finance will announce a reduction in the inflation targets. I don't think so. And the reason why is because if he does that, then the spotlight will move where it's supposed to be, and that is on the administrative prices. And the state is basically responsible for the inflation that we do have. But having said that, there's probably a move or room for another reduction in interest rates, depending what happens in the US. I think they're going to sit in their hands for now, but thereafter another 25 bips reduction in interest rates, and perhaps a little bit more. Talking about the Reserve Bank, talk about the currency as well, the rand. The rand is trading at just over 18 to the US at the moment. The correct level for the rand, and I do all sort of calculations in various ways, but the correct level for the currency is about 17, or just over 17, perhaps 17 and a half, around about 17 is the correct level for the currency.